The original Bush.
I felt terrible for him. He had a good arm, and yet, in front of the crowd, he bounced it.
Between him and his son,
I was always really surprised when my dad went into politics because my dad had his dream job, which was working for the Texas Rangers. My sister and I were obsessed with baseball because my dad loved baseball so much. And I still love baseball for that reason because it reminds me of my family and our memories growing up.
President had thrown out a ball as President of the United States at a baseball game.
My excuse for having bounced the pitch said my foot slipped on the rubber. Yeah, I made the mistake of wearing cowboy boots. You know, maybe I was trying to be too macho or something. I don't know.
He said, Nicky, did you hear I bounced the pitch? I wanted to say, oh, no, sorry, did you hear I bounced the pitch? And he is the president. So I said, yes, sir, I did hear.
hey, if you were cognizant, conscious, alive, and all that when Bush became president, 9/11 happened, and the aftermath and all that, with all the conspiracy theories, with the Bin Laden family getting flew out from Texas to Boston to Paris, France, and all that extra stuff, you know what I'm talking about. If you one of them who were conscious then, and you've been alive, you're alive now, and you've lived through Obama, and now this dumbass, if you one of them, can you imagine if it was Al Gore that was president of the United States when 9/11 happened? Can you imagine if Catherine Harris wasn't Secretary of State in Florida when the whole election happened, hanging chads and all that extra stuff? If the Supreme Court was back to Gary Graff. Second Lieutenant Mueller, 24 years and 3 months old, joined the battalion in November 1968. November 1968. Please, Black America, if you're of voting age, please, Black and Brown America, if you're of voting age, you gotta refuse to be enemies and go vote Democratic in November 2018. 50 years after Robert Mueller, the American, the true American hero, who doesn't even like being referred to as hero, who doesn't even have that hero complex. The man is a true hero, doesn't even act like it, he let other people tell it. But the one that's not a hero, who wants to be a hero, doesn't let it, like, I know what I mean. The man that's trying to bring some sense of sanity back to what it means to be American. Please, just because this man joined the battle of Vietnam 50 years ago in November 2 in 1968, please, 50 years later, commemorate that man's sacrifice to the country that he made 50 years ago, and even the sacrifice he's making now today. You know what I mean? Like, just go out and vote. And I'm saying vote specifically Democratic because the Republican Party has been exposed for what it is. They've always been racist. Their leaders just knew how to not put their the, the racist undertones of the party out there like that. But they finally got somebody who doesn't care for hiding those racist undertones. He's gonna say it. I like that about him. You know what I mean? He's unsuspectedly making people realize certain shit. So, but back to this though. But yeah, go vote Democratic. That blue wave needs to happen. It truly needs to happen. For the simple fact that there hasn't been a blue wave in this country since 5, 6 years after 9/11. Because after 9/11, even Britney Spears was on TV talking about, oh, you got to do what the president say. Everybody was so afraid, man. Like, you got to, the president knows what they're doing. Like, it was just, that day changed the world. It led to so much. Edward Snowden wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for that day. Why do you think Edward Snowden is in fucking Russia? All that whole running to, not to Hong Kong before going to Russia, that was a shell game. But That's neither here nor there. That was like the biggest out of left field play any president has ever received, yo. Barack, he was a man, bro. Back to Garrett. Second Lieutenant Mueller, 24 years and 3 month old, joined the battle in November 1968, one of 10 new officers assigned to the units that month. He knew he was arriving at the so-called pointy end of the American spear. Some 2.7 million American troops served in Vietnam, but the vast majority of casualties were suffered by those who fought in maneuver battalions like Mueller's. The war along the demilitarized zone was far different than it was elsewhere in Vietnam. The primary adversary was the North Vietnamese army, not the infamous Viet Cong guerrillas. North Vietnamese troops generally operated in larger units, were better trained, and were more likely to engage in sustained combat rather than melting away after staging an ambush. We fought regular hardcore army, Joe Burgess said. There were so many of them and they were really good. William Sparks, a private first class in a hotel company, recalls that Mueller got off the helicopter in the middle of a rainstorm, wearing a raincoat, a telltale sign that he was new to the war. You figured out pretty fast it didn't help to wear a raincoat in Vietnam. The humidity just condensed under the raincoat, and you were just as wet as you were without it. As Mueller walked up from the landing zone, Kellogg, who had no idea Mueller would be inheriting his platoon, recognized his OCS classmate's gait. When he came marching up the hill, I laughed, Kellogg says. We started joking. On Mueller's first night in the field, his brand new tent was destroyed by the wind. That thing vanished into thin air, Sparks said. He didn't even get to spend one night. Over the coming days, Kellogg passed along some of his wisdom from the field and explained the procedures for calling in artillery and airstrikes. Don't be John Wayne, he said. It's not a movie. Marines tell you something's up, listen to them. The lieutenant who didn't trust the Marines went to early deaths, Kellogg says. And with that, Kellogg told their commander that Mueller was ready, and he hopped aboard the next helicopter out. Today, military units usually train together in the U.S., deploy together for a set amount of time and return home together. But in Vietnam, rotations began and ended piecemeal, driven by the vagaries of injuries, illness, and individual combat tours. That meant Mueller inherited a unit that mixed combat experienced veterans and relative newbies. A platoon consisted of roughly 40 Marines, typically led by a lieutenant and divided into 3 squads, each led by a sergeant, which were then divided into 3 4-man fire teams led by corporals. While the lieutenants were technically in charge, the sergeants ran the show, and they could make or break a new officer. You land and you're at the mercy of your staff sergeants and your radio man, Mueller says. Marines in the field knew to be dubious of new young second lieutenants like Mueller. They were divided as goal breakers after the single goal bar that denoted their rank. They might have had a college education, but they sure as hell didn't have common sense, says Colin Campbell, who was on the hotel company's murder squad. Mueller knew his men feared he might be incompetent or worse. The platoon was petrified, he recalls. They wondered whether the new green lieutenant was going to jeopardize their lives to advance his own career. Mueller himself was equally terrified of assuming field command. As he settled in, word spread about the odd new platoon leader who had gone to both Princeton and Army Ranger School. Word was out real fast. Ivy League guy from an affluent family. That set off alarms. The affluent guys didn't go to Vietnam then, and they certainly didn't end up in a rifle platoon, says VJ Maranto, a corporal in H Company. There was so much talk about why is a guy like that out here with us. We weren't Ivy Leaguers. Indeed, none of his fellow hotel company Marines had written their college thesis on African territorial disputes before the International Court of Justice as Mueller had. Black America, you see why I appreciate Bob Mueller? That fact right there about his thesis. Now, I knew that because the Washington Post had did an excellent piece on Bob Mueller back in 2000 and 2001. I knew that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying, please read and vote. I know I'm asking you to vote in November, and every November afterwards for the next 50 years, let's just see, you know. I know I'm asking all that, but please read. You know what I mean? Please. Thank you. Let's lift every voice and read. Indeed, none of his fellow hotel company Marines had written their college thesis on African territorial disputes before the International Court of Justice as Mueller had. Most were from rural America and few had any formal education past high school. Maranto spent his youth on a small farm in Louisiana. Carl Rasmussen, a lance corporal, grew up on a farm in Oregon. Burgos was from the Mississippi Delta, where he was raised on a cotton plantation. After graduating from high school, David Harris had gone to work in a General Motors factory in his home state of Ohio, then joined the Marines when he was set to be drafted in the summer of 1967. Many of the Marines under Mueller's company had been wounded at least once. 19 Corporal C. Liverman had arrived in Vietnam just 4 months after a neighbor of his from Silver Spring, Maryland, had been killed at Khe Sanh and had seen heavy combat much of the year. He'd been hit by shrapnel in March of 1968 and then again in April, but after recovering in Okinawa, he had agitated to return to combat. Hotel Company quickly came to understand that its new platoon leader was no gold breaker. He wanted to know as much as he could, as fast as he could, about the terrain, what we did, the ambushes, everything, Moranto says. He was all about the mission, the mission, the mission. He's all about the Russian collision. What up, Donnie? You guys going to jail. I swear to God, yo. You guys going to jail. Yeah, I swear to God, yo. Hey, whoever the next American president is, please don't pull a Gerald Ford and pardon him. Please don't. Please don't pardon him. I know it's within your executive powers, I get it, but it's also within your executive powers to hold true to true Americanism and don't pardon a convicted thief who stole the presidency of the United States. Please don't pardon his dumb ass. Let his ass rot in jail. Send him to Guantanamo Bay or some shit. Let him go have a Bob sandwich. Where was that? Hotel Company quickly came to understand that its new platoon leader was no gold breaker. He wanted to know as much as he could, as fast as he could about the terrain, what we did, the ambushes, everything. Maranto says he was all about the mission, the mission, the mission. 2nd Battalion's mission, as it turned out, was straightforward: search and destroy. We stayed out in the ambush, out in the mountains just below DMC 24 hours a day, David Harris says. We were like bait. It was the same encounter. They'd hit us, we'd hit them, they'd disappear. Frequent deaths and injuries meant that turnover in the field was constant. When Maranto arrived at Hotel Company, he was issued a flight jacket that had dry blood on it. We were always low on men, Colin Campbell says. Mueller's unit was constantly on patrol. The battalion's record describes it as nomadic. I'm from a line of nomads. We are from a line of nomads. Fulanese. Never forget that. If you have it in your heart, baby girl, if you have it in your heart that you want to move to somewhere, to start over, don't let doubt creep in and stop you. We are nomads. We can always make it anywhere. Never forget that. Mueller's unit was constantly on patrol. The battalion's records described it as nomadic. Its job was to keep the enemy off kilter and disrupt their supply lines. You'd march all day, then you'd dig a foxhole and spend all night alternating going on watch, says Bill White, a hotel company veteran. We were always tired, always hungry, always thirsty. There were no showers. In those first weeks, Mueller's confidence as a leader grew as he won his men's trust and respect. You'd sense his nervousness, but you'd never see that in his demeanor, Movanto says. He was such a professional. The members of the platoon soon got acquainted with the qualities that would be familiar to everyone who dealt with Mueller later as a prosecutor and FBI director. He demanded a great deal and had little patience for malingering, but he never asked for more than he was willing to give himself. He was a no bullshit kind of guy, White recalls. I told you, a true American. No bullshit kind of guy trying to sift through the bullshit that is this White House. Mueller's units began December 1968 in a relatively quiet, providing security for the main military base in the area, a glorified campground known as Vandegrift Combat Base, about 10 miles south of the DMZ. It was one of the only organized outposts nearby for Marines, a place for resupply, a shower, and hot food. Lance Corporal Robert W. Cromwell, who had celebrated his 20th birthday shortly before beginning his tour of duty, entertained his comrades with stories from his own period of R&R. He'd met his wife and parents in Hawaii to be introduced to his newborn daughter. He was so happy to have a child and wanted to get home for good, Harry said. On December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by the air and naval forces of the Empire of Japan. Say, now let me stop. I'm sorry. You know if you're truly American, anywhere you read or see anything you see December 7th, the first thing that pops in your head is that FDR audio. December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. But yeah. Sorry guys. I went to American schools. I did a year of middle school and then high school and a few years of college. I can't help it. Don't let the accent fool you now. Okay? On December 7th, the battalion ordered helicopters for a new operation to retake control of a hill in an infamous area known as Mother's Ridge. The strategically important piece of ground, which ran along 4 hills on the southern edge of the DMZ, had been the scene of fighting for more than 2 years and had been overrun by the North Vietnamese months before. Artillery, airstrikes, and tank attacks had long since denuded the ridge of vegetation. That's a good word, denuded. But the surrounding hillsides and valleys were a jungle of trees and vines. When hotel company touched down and fanned out from its landing zones to establish a perimeter, Miller was arriving to what would be his first full-scale battle. As the American unit advanced, the North Vietnamese retreated. They were all pulling back to this big bunker complex as it turned out, Spark said. The Americans could see the signs of past battles all around them. You'd see shrapnel holes in the trees, bullet holes, Spark says. After 3 days of patrols, isolated firefights with an elusive enemy, and multiple nights of American bombardments, another unit in 2nd Battalion Fox Company received the order to take some high ground on Mother's Ridge. Even nearly 50 years later, the date of the operation remained burnt into the memory of those who fought in it. December 11th, 1968. That morning, after a night of airstrikes and artillery volleys meant to weaken the enemy, the men of Fox Company moved out at first light. The attack went smoothly at first. Nearly 50 years later, the date of the operation remained burnt into the memories of those who fought in it. December 11th, 1968. That morning, after a night of airstrikes and artillery volleys meant to weaken the enemy, the men of Fox Company moved out at first light. The attack went smoothly at first. They seized the western portions of the ridge without resistance, dodging just a handful of mortar rounds. Yet, as they continued east, heavy small arms fire started. As they fought their way forward, they came into intensive and deadly fire from bunkers and at least 3 machine guns, the regiments later reported. Because the vegetation because the vegetation was so dense, Fox Company didn't realize that it had stumbled into the midst of a bunker complex. Having fought their way in, the company found it extremely difficult to maneuver its way out, due both to the fire of the enemy and the problem of carrying their wounded. Hotel Company was on a neighboring hill, still eating breakfast when Fox Company was attacked. Sparks remembered that he was drinking a mocha, sea rations coffee with cocoa powder and sugar, heated by burning a golf ball-sized piece of C4 plastic explosives. We were ahead of Starbucks in this latte crap, he jokes. They could hear the gunfire across the valley. Lieutenant Mueller called, saddle up, Sparks says. He called for 4 squad. I was a grenade launcher and had 2 bags of ammo strapped across my chest. I could barely stand up. Before they could even reach the enemy, they had to fight their way through the thick brush of the valley. We had to go down the hill and come up Foxtrot Ridge. It took hours. It was the only place in the DMZ I remember seeing vegetation like that. It was thick and entwining. When the platoon finally crested the top of the ridge, they confronted the horror of the battlefield. There were wounded people everywhere, Sparks recalled. Mueller ordered everyone to drop their packs and prepare for a fight. We assaulted right out across the top of the ridge, he says. It wasn't long before the units came under heavy fire from small arms machine guns and a grenade launcher. There were 3 North Vietnamese soldiers right in front of us that jumped right up and sprayed us with AK-47, Sparks says. They returned fire and advanced. At one point, a Navy corpsman with them threw a grenade, only to have it bounce off a tree and then explode, wounding one of the hotel company's corporals. It just got worse from there, Sparks says. In the next few minutes, numerous men went down in Mueller's unit. Moranto remembers being impressed that his relatively green lieutenant was able to stay calm while under attack. He'd been in country less than a month. Most of us had been in country 6-8 months, Moranto says. He had remarkable composure, directing fire. It was sheer terror. They had RPGs, machine gun, and mortars. Mueller realized quickly how much trouble the platoon was in. That day was the second heaviest fire I received in Vietnam, Harry says. Lieutenant Mueller was directing traffic, positioning people, and calling in the airstrikes. He was standing upright, moving. He probably saved our hide. Cromwell, the lance corporal who had just become a father, was shot in the thigh by a 50 caliber bullet. When Harris saw his wounded friend being hustled out of harm's way, he was oddly relieved at first. I saw him and he was alive, Harry says. He was on the stretcher. Cromwell would finally be able to spend some time with his wife and his new baby, Harris figured. You lucky sucker, he thought. You're going home. But Harris had misjudged the severity of his friend's injury. The bullets had nicked one of Cromwell's arteries and he bled to death before he reached the field hospital. The death devastated Harris, who had traded weapons with Cromwell the night before. Harris had taken Cromwell's M14 rifle and Cromwell took Harris's M79 grenade launcher. The next day when we hit the crab, they called for him and he had to go forward. Harris said. Harris couldn't shake the feeling that he should have been the one on the stretcher. I've only told 2 people this story, Harris says. The battle atop and around Mother's Ridge raged for hours with the North Vietnamese. The battle atop and around Mother's Ridge raged for hours, with the North Vietnamese fire coming from the surrounding jungle. We got hit with an ambush, plain and simple, Harry says. The brush was so thick you had trouble hacking it with a machete. If you got 15 meters away, you couldn't see where you came from. As the fighting continued, the Marines atop the ridge began to run low on supplies. Johnny Liverman threw me a bag of ammo. He'd been ferrying ammo from one side of the ridge to the other, Sparks recalled. Liverman was already wounded, but he was still fighting. Then, during one of his runs, he came under more fire. He got hit right through the head, right where I was looking at him. I got the ammo, I crawled up there and got his M16 and told him I'd be back. Sparks and another Marine sheltered behind a dead tree stump, trying to find any protection amid the firestorm. Neither of us had any ammo left, Sparks recalled. He crawled back to Liverman to try to evaluate his film. I got him up on my shoulder and I got shot and I went down, he says. As he was lying on the ground, he heard a shout from atop the ridge. Who's that down there? Are they dead? It was Lieutenant Mueller. Sparks hollered back. Sparks and Liverman. Hold on, Mueller said. We're coming down to get you. A few minutes later, Mueller appeared with another Marine known as Slick. Mueller and Slick slid Sparks into a bomb crater with Liverman and put a battery dress on Sparks' wound. They waited until a helicopter gunship passed overhead, its guns clattering to distract the North Vietnamese, and hustled back towards the top of the hill in comparative safety. An OV-10 attack plane overhead dropped smoke grenades to help shield the Marines atop the ridge. Mueller, Sparks said, then went back to retrieve the mortally wounded Liverman. The deaths mounted. Corporal Agustin Rosario, a 22-year-old father and husband from New York City. Corporal Agustin Rosario. Giving up his life. I'm sure an immigrant in America giving up his life. You know. I'm sorry. I just had to throw that out there for Trump's racist voting base. You know. Where was I? The deaths mounted. Corporal Agustin Rosario, a 22-year-old father and husband from New York City, was shot in the ankle, and then while he tried to run back to safety, was shot again, this time fatally. Rosario too died waiting for a medevac helicopter. Finally, as the hours passed, the Marines forced the North Vietnamese tower to withdraw. By 4:30 p.m., the battlefield had quieted. As his commendation for the Bronze Star later read, Second Lieutenant Mueller's courage, aggressive initiative, and unwavering devotion to duty at great personal risk were instrumental in the defeat of the enemy force and were in keeping with the highest tradition of the Marine Corps and of the United States Naval Service. Wow. I'm going to repeat that again one more time. As his commendation for the Bronze Star later read, Second Lieutenant Mueller's courage, aggressive initiative, and unwavering devotion to duty at great personal risk were instrumental in the defeat of the enemy force and were in keeping with the highest tradition of the Marine Corps and of the United States Naval Service. Hello. As night fell, Hotel and Fox held the ground, and the Third Company Gulf was brought forward as additional reinforcements. It was a brutal day for both sides. 13 Americans died and 31 were wounded. We put a pretty good hurt on them, but not without great cause, Sparks says. My closest friends were all killed there on Foxtrot Ridge. As the Americans explored the field around the ridge, they counted 7 enemy dead left behind, in addition to 7 others killed in the course of the battle. Intelligence reports later revealed that the battle had killed the commander of the 1st Battalion, 27th North Vietnamese Army Regiment, and had virtually decimated his staff. For Mueller, the battle had proved both to him and his men that he could lead. The minutes the shit hit the fan, he was there, Moranto says. He performed remarkably. After that night, there were a lot of guys who wouldn't walk through walls for him. That first major exposure to combat and the loss of Marines under his command affected Mueller deeply. He was standing there thinking, did I do everything I could? He says, afterwards back at camp, while Mueller was still in shock, a major came over and slapped the young lieutenant on the shoulder saying, good job, Mueller. That vote of confidence helped me get through, Mueller told me. That gesture pushed me over. I wouldn't go through life guilty for screwing up. The heavy toll of the casualties at Mother's Ridge shook up the whole unit. Cromwell's death hit especially hard. His humor and good nature had knitted the unit together. He was happy-go-lucky. He looked after the new guys when they came in, Bill White recalls. For Harris, who had often shared a foxhole with Cromwell, the death of his best friend was devastating. White also took Cromwell's death hard. Overcome with grief, he stopped shaving. Mueller confronted him, telling him to refocus on the mission ahead, but ultimately provided more comfort than discipline. He could have given me punishment hours, White said, but he never did. Decades later, Mueller would tell me, you know what, before I finish all that, they got this little part right here. If you do go find it, he said, forgive me guys, I am new to this social media, thing, you know what I mean? I've been alive, I've been living in that cave, but not really living in that cave, you know what I mean? If you get the allegory of the cave. But I'm new to it all. They got this little blurb where it's like, it says Robert Mueller, A Brief History. August 7th, 1944, Robert Swan Mueller III is born in New York City, the son of DuPont executive Robert Swan Mueller II and Alice Truesdale Mueller. He grows up in Philadelphia with 4 younger sisters. 1962, graduates from the elite St. Paul School in Concord, New Hampshire, where he is captain of the soccer, lacrosse, and hockey teams. John Kerry is a teammate. 1962 to 1966, Mueller attends Princeton, his father's alma mater, with plans to become a doctor until organic chemistry trips him up. He earns a degree in politics and marries Anne Cable Standish 4 months later. 1966, enlists in the Marine Corps weeks after graduation and later attends the Officer Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia. 1968, deploys to Vietnam where he leads a rifle platoon. He returns home 1 year later with a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with distinction for combat valor. When his active duty ends in 1970, he owes the rank of captain. 1973, earns his law degree from the University of Virginia. 1976, after working reluctantly as a private litigator in San Francisco for 3 years, he became assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of California. He goes on to work as a federal prosecutor in San Francisco and Boston. That was in 1967. He started that. Okay. 1990, as assistant attorney general for the Department of Justice's Criminal Division, Mueller oversees the prosecution of General Manuel Noriega, the mastermind of the Lockerbie bombing, and Gambino family crime boss John Gotti. 1998, appointed U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California. 2001, confirmed as 6th Director of the FBI. He assumes the position 1 week before the 9/11 attacks. 2002, announces a broad reorganization of the FBI to reorient the Bureau's focus from crime fighting to counter terrorism. 2011, President Obama requests a 2-year extension of Mueller's term as FBI Director, which is limited to law by 10 years. The extension is passed by bipartisan support. So, when somebody is appointed an FBI agent, the director of the FBI, they confirmed and all that, it's for 10 years. If you didn't get all that, it's for 10 years. So when Mueller was first appointed in 2001, it was from 2001 to 2011. And the reason they do that, that's why presidential terms are 4 years. The reason they do that, because of the limits of presidential power, the limits of the time the president gets to be president. You know, it makes sense. That's why the democracy works with each other. You just gotta be involved in it. You can't complain about shit if you're not participating in it. You know what I mean? Like the lottery, you gotta be in it to win it, right? But that's neither here nor there. So typically, Mueller was appointed by a Republican president, namely George W. Bush, who they was just shown earlier, throwing out the pitch, doing after 9/11 and all that extra good shit. Usually, if the president is a Democratic president and his FBI director that he inherited was a Republican appointed director, when that term is up, they usually are not extended. The time is usually not extended at all. Someone else is appointed. But America's first black president, the educated black man, who's the reason why the white lashing of America took place in 2016. The man had the mental fortitude and the know-how, the know-how to know that, okay, you cannot just up and leave this mess that it is, because we still had work to do. We were in the midst of getting out of a recession at that point, which Obama got us out of anyway. But by 2011, Obama asked if he could have it extended for 2 years, which was passed by support from both Republicans and Democrats. So, I broke that down to say that don't let them fool you with that bullshit talking about how Mueller is just running a partisan witch hunt, this and that. That's nonsense. They're trying to pollute the jury pool, if you will. But a good percentage of Americans are smarter than that. You cannot sell them that kind of snake oil, okay? 2011, President Obama requested a 2-year extension of Mueller's term as FBI director, which is limited by law to 10 years. The extension is passed with bipartisan support. 2013, 2 years after, Mueller steps down as FBI director, having served the longest tenure since J. Edgar Hoover. May 2017, see? The man wasn't doing nothing. The man was chilling. He wasn't even working in government. Man was chilling. Then boom, the only person who does not have a horse in the race, does not have anything to gain either here nor there, was appointed in May 2017 to oversee the Department of Justice investigation into Russian influence in the 2016 election. Jeff Sessions, who has been a Trump supporter before this guy was even mainstream politically, who has been behind him this whole time, who probably met, to me it's not probably, to me I'm sure he probably met with some Russians, he probably dealt with them, he probably knows some shit. I know he definitely knows some shit. Jeff Sessions was offered the chance to be the one to do everything that Bob Mueller is doing right now. But because he knew there was a conflict of interest, Jeff Sessions, for better or for worse, knows policy. Mike Pence knows policy. He knows that for better or for worse, truth will out and murder will out. Back to the piece. Decades later, Mueller would tell me that nothing he ever confronted in his career was as challenging as leading men in combat and watching them be cut down. You see a lot, and every day after is a blessing, he told me in 2008. The memory of Mother's Ridge put everything, even terror investigations and showdowns with the Bush White House, into perspective. A lot is going to come your way, but it's not going to be the same intensity. When Mueller finally did leave the FBI in 2013, he retired. I'm quoting, that's why I did that. He retired into a busy life as a top partner at the law firm Wilmer Hill. He taught some classes in cybersecurity at Stanford. He investigated the NFL's handling of the Ray Rice domestic violence case, and he served as the so-called settlement master for the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal. While in the midst of the assignment, which required the kind of delicate give and take ill-suited to a hard-driving, no-nonsense Marine, the 72-year-old Mueller received a final call to public service. It was May 2017, just days into the swirling storm set off by the firing of FBI Director James Comey, and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein wanted to know if Mueller would serve as a special counsel in the Russian investigation. The job, overseeing one of the most difficult and sensitive investigations ever undertaken by the Justice Department, may only rank as the third hardest of Mueller's career, after the post-9/11 FBI and after leading those Marines in Vietnam. Having accepted the investigation as special counsel, he retreated into his prosecutor's bunker, cut off from the rest of America. In January 1969, after 10 days of rain showers and cold weather, the unit got a 3-day R&R break at Viet, a nearby support base. They listened to Super Bowl III on the radio as Joe Namath and the Jets defeated the Baltimore Colts. One touch of reality was listening to them. Mueller says, "Yo, speaking of the Jets, Sammy down. What up, boy? I see you. Hey, is it just me or should John Gruden just let everybody that's on Oakland right now go so he can inherit his own players, so he would have to say, oh, it was other people's players and all that. You're there for 10 years, you know. But what's up, man? $100 million man. White wealth created, white wealth being continued. You gotta love it." In January 1969, after 10 days of rain showers and cold weather, the units got a 3-day R&R break at Viet, a nearby support base. They listened to Super Bowl III on the radio as Joe Namath and the Jets defeated the Baltimore Colts. One touch of reality was listening to them, Mueller said. In the field, they got little news about what was transpiring at home. In fact, later that summer, while Mueller was still deployed, Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon, and events that people around the world watched live on TV. Mueller wouldn't find out until days afterwards. "There was this whole segment of history you missed," he says. R&R breaks were also rare opportunities to drink alcohol, though there was never much of it. Campbell says he drank just 15 beers during his 18 months in country. "I can remember drinking one beer, Ballantines," he says. In camp, the men traded magazines like Playboy and mail-order automotive catalogs, imagining the car they would soup up when they returned to the States. They passed the time playing rummy or pinochle. For the most part, Mueller skipped such activities, though he was into the era's music and still is. "I remember several times walking into a bunker and finding him in a corner with a book," Moranto says. "He reads a lot, every opportunity." Throughout the rest of the month, they patrolled, finding little contact with the enemy, although plenty of signs of their presence. Hotel company often radioed in support of finding fallen bodies and hidden supply cache, and they frequently took incoming mortar rounds from unseen enemies. Command under such conditions wasn't easy. Drug use was a problem, and racial tensions ran high. Many of the GIs were draftees. They didn't want to be there, Moranto says. When new people rotated in, they brought what was happening in the United States with them. Mueller recalled at times struggling to get Marines to follow orders. They already felt that the punishment of serving in the infantry in Vietnam was as bad as it could get. "Screw that," they'd reply sharply when ordered to do something they didn't want to do. "What are you going to do, send me to Vietnam?" Yet the Marines were bonded through the constant danger of combat. Everyone had close calls. Everyone knew that luck in the combat zone was finite. was finite fate pernicious. If the good Lord turned over a card up there, that was it, Mueller says. Nights particularly were filled with dread. The enemy preferred sneak attacks, often in the hours before dawn. Colin Campbell's recalls a night in his foxhole when he turned over to find a North Vietnamese soldier armed with an AK right behind him. He'd gotten inside our perimeter. He had our back, Campbell said. Why didn't he kill me and the other guy in the foxhole? Campbell shouted, and the infiltrator bolted. So another Marine down the line shot him dead. Mueller was a constant presence in the field, regularly reviewing the code signs and passwords that identified friendly units to one another. He was quiet and reserved. The planning was meticulous and detailed. He knew at night where every position was, Maranto recalls. It'd be unusual for him to come out and make sure the fire teams were correctly placed, that you were awake. The men I talked to who served alongside Mueller, men now in their 70s, mostly had strong memories of the type of leader Mueller had been. But many didn't know until I told them that the man who led their platoon was now the special counsel investigating Russian interference in the election. I had no idea, Burgess told me. When you've been in combat that long, you don't remember names. Faces you remember, he says. Maranto says he only put two and two together recently, although he'd wondered for years if that guy who was the FBI director had served with him in Vietnam. The name would ring a bell. You know that's a familiar name. But you're so busy with everyday life, Maranto says. April 1969 marked a grim American milestone. The Vietnam War's combat death toll surpassed the 33,629 Americans killed while fighting in Korea. It also brought a new threat to hotel companies area. A set of powerful 50 caliber machine guns nest that the North Vietnamese had set up to harass helicopters and low-flying planes. Hotel company and the battalion's other units devoted much of the middle of the month to chasing down the deadly weapons. Until they were found, resupply helicopters were limited, and flights were abandoned when they came under direct fire. One Marine was even killed in the landing zone. Finally, on April 15th and 16th, Hotel Company overran the enemy guns and forced a retreat, uncovering 10 bunkers and 3 gun positions. The next day at around 10 a.m., Mueller's platoon was attacked while on patrol. Facing small arms fire and grenades, they called for air support. An hour later, 4 attack runs hit the North Vietnamese position. 5 days later, on April 22nd, one of the third platoon's patrol came under similar attack, and the situation quickly became desperate. Sparks, who had returned to Hotel Company that winter after recovering from his wound at Mother's Ridge, was in the ambush patrol. We lost the machine gun, jammed up with shrapnel and the radio, he recalls. We had to pull back. With radio contact lost, Mueller's platoon was called forward as reinforcement. American artillery and mortars pounded the North Vietnamese as the platoon advanced. At one point, Mueller was engaged in a close firefight. The incoming fire was so intense, the stress of the moment was so all-consuming, the adrenaline pumping so hard that when he was shot, Mueller didn't immediately notice. Amid the combat, he looked down and realized an AK-47 round had passed clean through his thigh. Mueller kept fighting. Although seriously wounded during the firefight, he resolutely maintained his position and ably directing the fire of his platoon was instrumental in defeating the North Vietnamese Army force, reads the Navy commendation that Mueller received for his action that day. While approaching the designated area, the platoon came under a heavy volume of enemy fire from its right flank. Skillfully requesting and directing support, Marine skillfully requesting and directing supporting Marine artillery fire on the enemy position. First Lieutenant Mueller ensured that fire superiority was gained over the hostile units. Two other members of hotel companies were also wounded in the battle. One of them had his leg blown off by a grenade. It was his first day in Vietnam. Mueller's days in combat ended with him being lifted out by helicopter in a sling. As the aircraft pulled away, Mueller recalls thinking he might at least get a good meal out of the injury on a hospital ship, but he was delivered instead to a field hospital near Da Hong, where he spent 3 weeks recovering. Maranto, who was on R&R when Mueller was wounded, remembers returning to camp and hearing word that their commander had been shot. It could happen to any one of us, Maranto said. When it happened to him, there was a lot of sadness. They enjoyed his company. Mueller recovered and returned to active duty in May. Since most Marine officers spent only 6 months on the combat rotation, and Mueller had been in the combat zone since November, he was sent to serve at command headquarters, where he became an aide-de-camp to Major General William K. Jones, the head of the 3rd Marine Division. By the end of 1969, Mueller was back in the United States, his combat tour complete, working at the Marine barracks near the Pentagon. Soon thereafter, he sent off an application to the University of Virginia's law school. I consider myself exceptionally lucky to have made it out of Vietnam, Mueller says years later in the speech. There were many who did not. And perhaps because I did survive Vietnam, I've always felt compelled to contribute. He is still contributing at 72. Over the years, a few of his former fellow Marines from hotel company recognized Mueller and have watched his career unfold on the national stage over the past 2 decades. Sparks recalled eating lunch on a July day in 2001 with the news on. The TV was on behind me. We're going to introduce the new FBI director, Robert Swan Mueller. I slowly turned and I looked and I thought, golly, that's Lieutenant Mueller. Sparks, who speaks with a thick Texas accent, says his first thought was the running joke he'd had with his former commander. I'd always call him Lieutenant Mueller, and he'd say, that's Muller. More recently, his former Marine comrade Moranta says that after spending 6 months in combat with Mueller, he has watched the coverage of the Special Counsel investigation unfold and laughed at the news coverage. He says he knows Mueller isn't sweating the pressure. I've watched people in the news talking about the distractions getting to him. He says, I don't think so. I had done a 7-hour binge reading of John McCain's The Restless Wave on July the 4th because of the significance of that day, obviously Independence Day and whatnot, and because of trying to pay the rent still, been busy, been working. I had to get rid of that and redo after his passing because it makes sense now. In case you hadn't noticed, based on what ESPN has on, today is September 11, 2018. 17 years ago, I was in the 10th grade and the world changed that day forever. As somebody who believed myself to be a student of history, who believed myself to be living in quite historic times, I have been living in quite historic times in the last 17 years. The world changed that day forever. And the world is gonna keep continue to change. It changed again when Obama became the first American of African descent to be elected president of the United States. He did. And because of that, we're stuck in an alternate universe where the bigot has risen to show white racism for what it is, you know. So I'm gonna jump over to John McCain's Restless Wave because it is a beautiful book. I've always liked McCain. You know, he's a Republican, true and true. You know, but at the same time, though, he's a man who always placed integrity and Americanism over 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 partisan alignments, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. You know what I mean? So if you get that, you get that. Even when he went up against Barack in 2008, the man conducted himself with elegance and class. To this day, for that man to have just passed on like he has, the only reason why his life is not celebrated the way it is, especially since him being a Republican his whole life, and there being a Republican president in office right now, speaks to the fact that he was more of an American than he was a Republican. So, in other words, if you're a Republican right now, you're not American. Based on the fact that you're a Republican, fuck you if you don't believe it. You know what I mean? So, for the good-hearted Americans that call themselves Republicans, this book is dedicated to you. You know what I mean? Some of the things that you don't think is what's making you think or do things the way you do, as far as voting for certain people that believe in certain xenophobic beliefs, you know. And John McCain said a lot of true stuff in this. Some things he said about Obama I don't agree with, but a lot of things he said about Obama I do agree with, you know. And most of the reasons why I don't agree with some of the things he said about Obama is because, for better or for worse, if you're black and American, you have not put yourself in the context, in the shoes of a black man being the leader of the entire United States and having to deal with that on that level, that only he and his wife, who he shared that time with, can probably get in that mind frame to understand that. You know what I mean? Like, if you cannot understand what that man had to deal with psychologically, mentally, and then now have to put up with ethnic self-hate from his own black folks, you know what I mean? Like, I say that to say, because McCain pointed out some things that Obama did not so well as president. It goes back to what I was saying not too long ago about how Obama only had a full Congress for 4 months, you know. But long story short, though, Mr. McCain, may you rest in peace. Thank you for providing this platform for me to be able. Thank you for providing this book before you pass on. I'm glad you did. You probably was thinking along the same lines I was thinking, knowing and believing that America is not just 4 years of an idiot being president. America is the time before that, the times during, and the time that's going to be after. You know, you get that. So let's go ahead and